Welcome to Archive Vault, where we explore declassified records, hidden histories, and state-level investigations. Please note, some illustrative narration is AI-generated for storytelling purposes. All content is educational and documentary-based. For centuries, there has been one place on Earth that attracts more speculation than almost any other institution. Not Area 51, not underground military bases, not secret laboratories, the Vatican. At the heart of Vatican City exists an archive so famous that people believed it contained forbidden knowledge, erased histories, and truths powerful enough to shatter religion itself. For most of modern history, it was officially known as the Vatican's Secret Archives. And that single word, secret, did more damage than any locked door ever could. Because once people hear secret, imagination fills the gaps. Hidden gospels, lost civilizations. Proof that history is a lie. Proof that humanity is not what it believes it is. But here's the first truth that rarely goes viral. The Vatican never denied the archive existed. It never denied it was restricted. It never denied it held documents the public had never seen. What it denied was the fantasy. In 2019, something quietly changed. The Vatican officially renamed the archive to the Vatican Apostolic Archive. Same building, same documents, same restrictions, different name. Why? Because the word secret had become uncontrollable. In Latin, secretum does not mean forbidden, it means private. Private as in the personal records of popes, diplomacy, and governance. And that distinction matters, because private power doesn't need monsters to be dangerous, it only needs memory. Why this archive matters? The Vatican Apostolic Archive contains over 50 miles of shelving, millions of handwritten documents, letters between popes and kings, diplomatic negotiations that shaped wars and borders, records that influenced empires, quietly. And here's the part most conspiracy theories get wrong. The danger of these archives is not what's hidden, it's what's recorded. Because once something is written down, it can no longer be denied. Access is not forbidden, but it is controlled. Contrary to popular belief, the Vatican does allow access to its archives, but not to everyone. Access is limited primarily to trained scholars, historians, and researchers with verified credentials. Even then, access is often restricted by time periods, not topics. You can't simply ask for everything controversial. You must know exactly what you're looking for. And that alone filters out most people. Not because they would discover something terrifying, but because truth inside an archive requires patience, language, and context. And patience is the enemy of virality. The myth was louder than the reality over time. The myth of the archive grew larger than the archive itself. The public imagined a single forbidden book, one document that would end religion, one revelation that would collapse civilization. But that idea is comforting, because one book can be destroyed. What's harder to face is this. History is not hidden in one place. It is buried across thousands of pages, and pages don't scream, they whisper. The real question begins here. If the Vatican wanted to hide the truth forever, it wouldn't preserve it so carefully, it wouldn't catalog it, it wouldn't protect it from time. The real question isn't what is inside the archives. The real question is, why do some documents remain sealed for decades, sometimes centuries, before the world is allowed to read them? That answer leads us directly into the first confirmed case, where hidden Vatican records could have changed how history judged one of the most powerful institutions on Earth. The War Files: What the Vatican Didn't Say for 70 Years. If you want proof that the Vatican has hidden information capable of changing how history is judged, you don't need speculation. You need World War II. For decades, one question refused to go away. What did the Vatican know while Europe was burning? At the center of that question stood one man, Pius XII. To some, he was a cautious diplomat trying to protect the Church. To others, he was the silent pope who failed to speak loudly enough while millions were being murdered. And for over 70 years, the Vatican held the only evidence that could tilt the verdict either way, locked in its archives. Why these files mattered? During World War II, the Vatican was not a passive observer. It was a sovereign entity, a diplomatic power, a central node of communication between nations at war. Letters arrived daily from bishops, governments, resistance groups, and foreign leaders. Reports described deportations, ghettos, mass killings. The world argued endlessly about what the Pope should have done. But the real question was simpler. What did he actually know? And when did he know it? The answer was written down and sealed. The long silence. For decades, historians requested access to the wartime archives. They were denied, not because the Vatican said the files didn't exist, not because the Vatican claimed innocence, but because, according to church policy, archives are opened by pontificate, not by public pressure. That meant the documents of Pope Pius XII remained closed long after the war ended. This silence fueled suspicion, and in the absence of documents, imagination rushed in. The moment the doors opened. In 2020, something historic happened. The Vatican officially opened the archives covering the pontificate of Pius XII from 1939 to 1958. This was not a leak, not a whistleblower, not a hack. It was a controlled, formal release of millions of pages to scholars. And this is where the story becomes uncomfortable, because the documents did not deliver a simple villain or a simple hero. They delivered complexity. What the documents revealed. The open files showed that the Vatican was far more informed than some defenders claimed. Warnings about the persecution of Jews did reach the highest levels. Information about deportations circulated internally. At the same time, the documents showed something else. Fear. Fear that open condemnation would provoke retaliation. Fear that Catholics under Nazi rule would suffer more if the Church spoke too loudly. Fear that diplomacy, not confrontation, was the only way to save lives quietly. Whether those fears were justified is still debated, but the archives changed the argument forever. Because after 2020, no one could honestly say, "We don't know what the Vatican knew." Now we do. Why this changes everything. This is the moment most conspiracy theories collapse. Because the Vatican did not hide these documents forever. It delayed them. And that delay shaped decades of public judgment. Reputations were built and destroyed without evidence. Books were written without access to primary sources. Entire moral verdicts were passed based on silence. This is the real power of archives. Not secrets that explode, but truths that arrive too late to stop the damage. The uncomfortable realization. The Vatican did not hide these files to protect a supernatural secret. It hid them because institutions move slowly, and history is dangerous when released without control. Once documents are public, they cannot be unread. They cannot be reframed. They cannot be put back. And that is why archives are opened cautiously. Not because the truth is fictional, but because the truth is permanent. The pattern begins to appear. World War II was not an isolated case. It revealed a pattern the Vatican has followed for centuries. Documents are preserved. Documents are sealed. Documents are eventually released, often long after the people involved are dead, which leads to the next question. If wartime diplomacy could be hidden for 70 years, what about belief itself? Because the Vatican didn't just preserve political history, it preserved the texts that define faith. And some of those texts shaped civilization by what they included and by what they left out. Long before wars, borders, and modern politics, the Vatican became something far more powerful than a government. It became a guardian of memory. At the center of this role is one of the most important collections of written material on Earth, housed within the Vatican Library. This is not a mythic vault. It is a real place with real shelves, real manuscripts, and real consequences. Because texts don't just record belief, they create it. The manuscript that quietly shaped Christianity among the most important items connected to the Vatican is Codex Vaticanus. It is one of the oldest and most complete surviving manuscripts of the Bible, written in Greek dating back to the 4th century. Why does this matter? Because when historians reconstruct ancient religious texts, they do not rely on one source. They compare manuscripts. And the oldest manuscripts carry enormous weight. Codex Vaticanus influences how scholars determine which verses are original, which passages were added later, which words were changed over centuries. Small changes in ancient language lead to massive changes in theology. One word can reshape doctrine, one sentence can redefine morality, one omission can erase an entire idea. This is not conspiracy. This is textual history, the uncomfortable truth about lost books. Many people believe the Vatican hides forbidden gospels that would destroy Christianity if revealed. That idea is partially wrong. The so-called lost gospels, such as texts associated with early Christian communities, were not locked away in Vatican basements. Many were discovered elsewhere, like in Egypt in the 20th century. What the Vatican did do was something far more subtle. It helped define which texts were considered authoritative and which were labeled non-canonical. That process happened in the early centuries of Christianity, long before modern popes. And once a canon is established, everything outside it becomes other, not erased, not destroyed, but excluded. And exclusion shapes belief just as powerfully as suppression. Why this mattered for civilization? The Bible was not just a religious book, it became the foundation of legal systems, the moral framework of empires, the justification for wars, laws, and punishments. So when certain interpretations became dominant, they didn't just affect faith, they affected history. Which stories were emphasized? Which teachings were prioritized? Which ideas faded into obscurity? These decisions weren't made in secret rooms with evil intent. They were made through councils, debates, translations, and politics. And the records of those processes, letters, drafts, arguments, are preserved in archives. Preservation is not neutral. Here is a reality most people miss. Preserving a text is not the same as promoting it. And not promoting a text does not mean destroying it. The Vatican's role was often to protect manuscripts from being lost to time, fire, or war. But protection also meant gatekeeping. Access required language skills, scholarly training, institutional approval. For centuries, only a small group of people could read these texts. And when only a few people can read something, those people shape how it is understood. The conspiracy that doesn't need lies. This is where the story becomes more unsettling than myths. The Vatican didn't need to fabricate scripture. It didn't need to invent belief. All it had to do was preserve some texts more carefully than others, translate certain versions instead of alternatives, and allow interpretation to solidify over time. No cover-up required, just continuity. And continuity is powerful. The pattern becomes clear. First, we saw political history delayed by decades. Now we see belief shaped by preservation and interpretation. Nothing supernatural, nothing cinematic, just documents, ink, and time. Which brings us to the next layer, the one people rarely talk about. Because belief and politics eventually collide with something even more sensitive: money, power, diplomacy. And when those collide inside a religious institution, the records become even more carefully controlled. Power, money, and the documents that rewrite reputations. When belief meets politics, something inevitable follows: power. And wherever power exists, records are kept. Not stories, not sermons, documents. The Vatican is not only a spiritual authority, it is also a sovereign state, a diplomatic actor, and a financial institution. And that is where some of the most sensitive archives exist. Not because they hide miracles, but because they record decisions. The moment the Church became a state again. In 1929, the Vatican signed the Lateran Treaty with Italy. This agreement, created Vatican City as a sovereign nation, settled decades of political conflict, included financial compensation. This was not theology, this was geopolitics. And from that moment on, the Vatican functioned not only as a church, but as a state with treaties, negotiations, and confidential communications. Every one of those interactions created paper trails, and paper trails carry consequences. The financial shadow most people misunderstand. One of the most misunderstood institutions connected to the Vatican is the Institute for the Works of Religion, often casually called the Vatican Bank. It does not operate like a commercial bank. It does not serve the general public. Its purpose is tied to managing assets for religious institutions. Yet throughout the 20th century, controversies emerged. Accusations of mismanagement, links to financial scandals in Italy, questions about transparency. What made these stories explosive was not rumor. It was documentation, internal audits, correspondence, transaction records. And here is the uncomfortable truth. Financial archives don't reveal monsters. They reveal systems. Systems where decisions made decades ago ripple forward. And once those documents are open, they don't accuse. They expose. Why reputations are protected by time. The Vatican has long followed a principle that frustrates modern observers. Documents are released when the people involved can no longer be harmed directly. This is not unique to the Church. Governments around the world do the same. But when religion is involved, the delay feels sinister. Because faith expects moral clarity. Institutions operate on caution, and caution leaves records sealed, not to hide crimes forever, but to prevent immediate collapse. This is where conspiracy narratives often overshoot reality. The Vatican does not erase its past. It postpones it. Silence as a strategy. One of the most powerful tools any institution has is silence. Not denial, not lies. Silence. Silence allows ambiguity to grow. It allows speculation to fill the gaps. It allows time to soften outrage. And archives are silence in physical form. Boxes that say, not yet, but eventually not yet becomes now. And when it does, history is rewritten quietly, not by revelation, but by footnotes. The truth that rarely goes viral, people imagine that hidden documents would shatter belief overnight. But belief doesn't collapse that way. It erodes slowly. Through revised biographies, updated textbooks, subtle shifts in academic consensus. By the time the public notices, the damage, or correction, is already complete. That is why archival power is more dangerous than secrecy myths, because it works in silence. The pattern is undeniable now. We've seen it 4 times. Political decisions delayed, moral judgments postponed, belief shaped through preservation, power protected through timing. No demons, no forbidden spells, just institutions behaving like institutions have always behaved, which leads us to the final realization. The one most people never reach. Because once you understand how archives really work, the conspiracy stops being external. It becomes personal. The final truth. Why the archive is a mirror. By now, the pattern should be impossible to ignore. The Vatican did not build its power by hiding a single explosive secret. It built its influence by preserving everything and releasing it on its own timeline. And that realization changes the entire story. Because once you understand how the archives function, the mystery stops being about what the Vatican is hiding and starts being about why humans react the way they do when history is revealed slowly. The illusion of a final revelation. Conspiracy culture thrives on one promise, that there exists a single document, a final book, one truth so powerful it would collapse religion, governments, and belief itself. But history doesn't work that way. Civilizations don't end because of one page. They change because of thousands of pages released over generations, each one slightly altering the story we tell ourselves. The Vatican understands this better than almost anyone, because it has watched empires rise and fall, while its archives stayed standing. Why secrecy feels threatening. People fear hidden knowledge because it implies inequality. Someone knows something you don't. But the Vatican's archives reveal a different discomfort. The truth is often available, just inaccessible, locked not by force, but by language, time, education, patience. And that creates a different kind of fear. Not fear of monsters, but fear of complexity. Because complexity refuses to give clean villains and heroes. What really changes history? The documents that matter most are rarely sensational. They are a letter that proves someone knew earlier than claimed, a memo that shows hesitation instead of certainty, a financial record that explains a political decision. These don't destroy belief, they complicate it. And complication is far more destabilizing than shock. The Vatican is not unique. Here is the part that rarely gets said out loud. The Vatican is not an exception. Governments seal archives. Corporations bury records. Families hide letters. The difference is that the Vatican's memory stretches back nearly 2,000 years. And with that much memory comes an uncomfortable truth. Every institution is eventually judged by its documents, not by its speeches, not by its myths, by what it wrote down. The mirror moment. This is where the archive becomes a mirror, because when documents are finally opened, the question is no longer, what did they hide? The question becomes, what did we allow? What did we ignore? What did we justify because it was convenient at the time? History doesn't just expose institutions, it exposes societies. Why the myth will never die. The myth of forbidden Vatican secrets will always survive, because it's comforting. It allows us to believe that the truth is hidden somewhere else, guarded by someone else, controlled by forces beyond us. The reality is harder. The truth is written down, filed, preserved, and when it's finally read, it rarely feels like revelation. It feels like recognition. The final realization. The Vatican's deepest secret is not what it knows, it's what it remembers. Because memory outlives power, memory outlives belief, memory outlives empires. And archives don't exist to end the world. They exist to make sure the world can never pretend it didn't know. Thank you for listening to Archive Vault Podcast. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive and found it insightful. Wishing you a great week ahead, and remember to subscribe so you don't miss our next episode. We'll be back soon with more stories from the archives. See you next time.